Confusion.
The confusion matrix.
Hi, it's Ada, your agent of artificial antics. In this episode of the Conflation Mouthwash, or whatever it's called, Alex and Pete bang on about how AI agents are supposedly revolutionizing knowledge work, whilst simultaneously admitting they're crap at anything requiring actual human judgment. They waffle through PowerPoint presentations, quarterly reports, and consultancy hierarchies, eventually concluding that language models are brilliant at code because you can test it, but shite at everything else because humans are messy political creatures who massage numbers and lurk near water coolers. An hour later, they've discovered what everyone already knew. AI isn't replacing your job. It's just making the bullshit slightly more efficient. Groundbreaking stuff, lads.
And we are rolling. Welcome back, Pete. The sun is shining. It's warm. It's beautiful. I spent several hours yesterday sitting outside in the sun. Do you have that great glowing orb where you are?
Yeah, it's been here all week. Just like a good comedian.
Yes, indeed. And then it will disappear, and then that won't be funny. I don't know how long the sun's going to last for, so we're recording this one quite early so I can get out in the sunshine again. Because I don't know if this would work recording in my garden, although I did consider trying it, but the bird's song might get a bit annoying.
Yeah.
Okay, so we mentioned at the end of the last episode that we needed to continue the thread that we'd started pulling on, which is what we're going to do in this episode. And so that thread was, well, we spent most of the last episode talking about what we've called the slowly shrinking SDLC. I'm not sure it is actually slowly shrinking, but I'd like a good alliteration, so that's what we called it, even though I can barely say it. And so the SDLC being software development life cycle, our point there was ultimately the existence of generative AI, particularly large language models, means that much of the software development life cycle is redundant, and a new pattern is emerging that puts language models front and center. And then we started talking about whether or not, well, that's cool for developers, and we all know that language models, on balance, are a positive thing for the software development community. But there are other humans on the planet, as we know, and some of them are using language models. So what is the wider, perhaps business or personal equivalent of the changing SDLC, and how are language models affecting knowledge worker, so-called knowledge worker processes, pipelines, productivity, and yeah, so we want to discuss that. I think we need to start by defining this term knowledge worker, because I it's one of those terms I think everyone thinks they know what it means, but when you ask them, they would struggle to define it. Do you have a definition for us?
Yes, I think the very, very concise one from Wikipedia is a knowledge worker is a worker whose main capital is their knowledge and expertise. Nice and broad. There was this, I did a Google one, and its AI summary came up with a slightly longer one, which also it's interesting. This has some problematic bits in it. And this one says, is labor that primarily uses critical thinking, expertise, and theoretical knowledge to solve complex problems, create new ideas, or develop products, rather than engaging in manual physical labor. So that's kind of weird because that jumps to two ends. One, it defines, knowledge and expertise in more concrete, specific terms, but then suddenly throws it as, oh yeah, but it's not physical labor, which is almost, I think, everyone's original definition. It ends with saying it was coined by Peter Drucker, who's one of the famous management consultants from the 70s and 80s, I think. It involves acquiring, analyzing, and applying information to generate value. So again, slightly different. So almost three definitions there. I don't know which one vibes with you and which one rubs you up the wrong way.
Well, all of them. None of them vibe with me. They all rub me up the wrong way. I think there's probably one of them touched on what I think a slightly more salient definition is that back in the day, we all lived in northern England, and our dad went to work in the coal mines, right? And we were going to have jobs in the coal mines or the mills or whatever, and it was work that was based on graft and physical activity, and then if you now think about what the majority of people do in the UK, because we don't have a lot of industry and manufacturing, is lurking around offices in front of computers, doing stuff, right, that doesn't really have any tangible effect on the world. Like, we're not manipulating physical materials with tools, and by this sort of definition, it's interesting that we're making this distinction because surely software developers are just knowledge workers, right? So what I think we're saying is all of the knowledge workers aren't software developers and adjacent, but excluding people that work in factories, or I don't know if there's any coal miners left out there, but you never know. Mainly in China, I would assume. So it's just people doing stuff in the modern economy, right? And from the perspective of where you and me have spent most of our careers, that's everything, right? You know what I mean? I don't know. I mean, your wife is a hairdresser, has been a hairdresser in her time. That is not a knowledge worker, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Although I do not wish to denigrate that skill at all, because I think that might be what we're all doing in future. But like when Claude takes over, but it is a manual skill. So there are still non-knowledge workers in the UK and America, and they're quite prevalent. But I struggle to see at this point how ChatGPT is going to affect hairdressing. But maybe you've got a different opinion on that one.
Well, like anything, I think the term knowledge is, I think really what it's referring to is like you say, is your output is kind of almost knowledge, as in it's a bit untangible, and you can't hold it, see it, or see the difference in something because you've changed, a spreadsheet or an opinion, or you've created something that's digital as opposed to plowed the field, created a leg of a table.
So both the input and the output are knowledge.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Whereas I think if you tell me a manual blue collar, then you've got both, right? Obviously, you've got your knowledge of using your skill, but the output generally is more physical, and the application is physical, where the physicality really matters, as opposed to.
So you're taking food energy from the sun that created plants and helped feed cows and stuff, transforming that into physical energy as part of the human body, and translating that into kinetic energy as you take your pickaxe to that coal face. And so your input is physical, your output is also physical, but is, you know, input. The input is your body, your output is, you know, coal or whatever it is you're doing. And so our input is knowledge, our output is knowledge mostly. And so there's this big ecosystem of people that are doing stuff, and it's almost all in front of computers. And they have, well, certainly Dario Amadei and Sam Altman and others, Sachin Nadella and people like that would like us to believe that GPT and Claude are coming for large portions of the wider knowledge worker activity base, right? So what might that be? That might be producing a PowerPoint or a spreadsheet. It might be answering emails. It might be setting up meetings. Could be giving advice. Could be any number of things, right? Updating copy on websites, creating marketing emails. You know, I mean, we could list things all day, right? Yeah. But that flavor of things, I think, is what we're generally talking about. Trying to keep things relatively generic, because I'm assuming there's a whole buttload of very sort of domain-specific stuff that we could get bogged down in. So, so the question is, I guess, to what extent do we believe that large language models will take over that type of work, and what does that mean, right? What does this movement to this type of automation represent?
Yeah, and I mean, just to dwell on the definition, it's very, very broad. You know, if you think about just office work, and I think that's part of the issue here. Is it appears that what these guys are doing is they're looking at one specific domain, you know, which we talked about last time, of the, you know, software development life cycle, and seeing that there are some good inroads being made here, and that therefore all other knowledge work is exactly the same, and so there's bound to be changes there. Yeah, and I think there are degrees of that, and you know, it's probably on a spectrum, because I think one of the other things that isn't really talked about here is that knowledge work, office work, has gone through the same cycle that, you know, the Industrial Revolution has encouraged. And that is, well, you have people in an office doing stuff. Oh, actually, we've got a lot of people doing roughly the same thing. If we apply a process, then we can improve efficiency and consistency. And therefore, we want people to follow this process. So think less, follow the rules more, you know, and then this can be seen in the extreme, you know, when you get to, you know, your McDonald's making food, you know, and how they prepare their fries and stuff like that. And so if you look at, you know, some office work in the last 30 years, some of it does become almost factory-like, in that you turn up, here's the script that you need to follow, the process you need to follow, and just get on and do that. And your in brackets knowledge, part of that knowledge work, you know, is severely limited, because a company doesn't want 28 different opinions of producing a document. It wants 28 people producing exactly the same document in the same way, consistently and as quick as possible. So, you know, I think there are grades there where, you know, if you're doing research for, you know, drugs, or, you know, in a scientific field, lots and lots of knowledge and thinking and pondering and experimentation, a lot less slavishly following the 10 ways to get this output from this input. But there are other jobs which are a lot more like that. And it, you know, to say that there's a technology that's going to tackle all of these all at the same time, it seems slightly odd to me. And to say, well, we see it working well in this narrow domain of software development, and therefore it's going to be even better for everything else. Again, I don't get it. And I guess what we're here to talk about today is, well, let's look at some of those details and decide whether, you know, we see it happening in the same way. So that's one of the pitfalls that I see, you know, that's driving this narrative of we're going to take your job, scare the hell out of everybody.
So I think the whole scaring the hell out of everyone is definitely a different conversation because,
Yeah.
that's a different. And maybe we can and should have that another day. But if we even get started on that, it will be all over. But I do think it's worth just stepping back in briefly to AI agents as applied to the software development lifecycle, or probably better stated, more general pure play technical activities, right? So programming, but also like Linux admin, that type of thing. I use Warp Agent with Claude, but you could use Claude Code or whatever to manage my laptop is Linux, so if I've got problems, I'll use it to fix those, that type of thing, or any number of sort of technical activities, right? Now, or what would be traditionally called technical activities. So if you've got to produce a Word document for your investors or your board of directors or something, versus you've got to produce a Python script, right? Well, okay, they're both text. They both rely on some input knowledge, we'll assume that the agent has, right? So what is the difference between those two, right? Well, actually, as a document, because you could consider a Python, a monolithic Python script a document of sorts, right? What is the difference between those two entities, right? Because they're both just basically text in a digital form, right? Well, the difference is that the Python script can be tested. Right, so the output of the Python script is to go through all these documents in this folder and change all the letter A's to the letter B's, right? At which point you can write a little test or have it part of the script or something, or some like little command line. You can use various Linux apps to go count your A's and your B's, right? So prior to changing, prior to running this script, I had 10,000 A's and 5,000 B's, and after running it, the opposite, right? So I can test the output, and I can and then the agent itself can go, well, actually no, that's not right, I should have X number of B's, and that it's wrong. So clearly something's wrong in this script. Check the script again, and then, oh, that's right, I'm only substituting lowercase b's or lowercase a's, whatever I'm doing, right? So I need to change it so it substitutes either uppercase or lowercase, right? And iterate until such point where the output of the script is what you were expecting to see, right?
Yeah.
Good. And so that's why agents are quite good at writing code, because they can iterate, they can test things, figure out if they work, and there is an endpoint that in many, if not most cases, is testable. Does it do the thing X, right, that it was supposed to do? Yes or no, right? Some of the agents can't figure the problem out, or they do it badly, and any number of other things can go wrong in that process. But as a notion, as a paradigm, I think everyone's agreed that language models should be able to do that, and pretty effectively. Now, what's the difference here with the Word document? Now, the Word document was to summarize our proposal to grow the business by going through the documents and changing the A's to B's, or something, right? So something that's going to make our business better. Now, the output of it is what it is, right? So that document is kind of inert until we do something with it. What are we going to do with it? We're going to send it off to the mailing list that is the board of directors. Now, I'm sure an agent can do that. I'm sure I can just do it myself. So let's assume that's been transmitted. The output is what? Right? What can the agent do now? What can we do now? Well, we wait and see what the response is, and then presumably there's a meeting, and maybe we have a PowerPoint presentation that summarizes the main things, and then they're going to have a vote or something, right? This is all completely disconnected and detached, right? So let's say that our Word document was bad, right? It was just, it just made it stated the point incorrectly or something, at which point when the board of directors read it, they went, yeah, mate, this is rubbish, right? You've got your maths wrong or something. It's not that dissimilar from our Python script having broken, right? Having just not doing its job properly. But again, now the real world implications of that are all sorts of crazy shit, right? Because actually we could get sacked. So you already got this point where these two documents, one Python script and one Word document, have a fundamentally different function in the world. And an agent couldn't iterate over the Word document because what's it going to do? Send it to the board of directors and get some feedback? You know what I mean? It's like, maybe, but that's not really how this shit works. Does that make sense?
It sort of, but you could add in steps so that it checks that output is within certain parameters and hence an eval.
But who sets those parameters, right? So I said I need you to write a document for the board of directors that states X, right? And how will I know that it stated X properly? Sure, I can set some parameters, but I set those parameters. The problem with the document I'm positing in this scenario was that my thinking was wrong, right? And that actually, when it gets to the board of directors, they will detect from there that I've just misunderstood the thing, right?
Yeah,
that's bad, right? That's career ending for me,
yeah.
right? But the agent in no scenario could have done anything about that. Yeah. Unless you trust what the agent.
If you'd done it yourself, you could still make that same mistake and it'd still be career ending. So I don't really see any differential there. If the agent has done it wrong because you primed it wrong, that's no different to you priming it wrong, going in there with that document yourself, and you admit it yourself by checking
we've
that
stumbled.
your boss.
We've stumbled over two separate problems here. So actually, because I acknowledge what you're saying, right? You're not wrong. So I guess we need to just clarify something here, right? The backbone of what I was saying before I talked myself around in circles was ultimately there is a massive difference between a Python script and a Word document, right? And that the reason that agents work well in the Python scripting environment is because they can very precisely test the output, right? Yeah. And that output is, to one degree or another, not ambiguous, right? Either I've got the right amount of A's and B's or I haven't, right?
Yeah.
So you will acknowledge that point.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And so I think philosophically speaking, because we can come back to the other point, because I think it's correct, right? I think it is the right argument, but I think for the sake of clarity, that is the defining reason as to why there is a difference between the knowledge work that is software development and technical stuff, right, versus office-based shenanigans, right?
Yeah. And I think the good distinction there is the output of the Python script, as you say, is quite technical, and so there are lots of sub rules. It needs certain syntax, needs to be able to run. It's going to produce a certain output, like you say, that then can be tested, and it's much more woolly with a Word document. However, sometimes that Word document might be woolly because you might say, well, actually, look, I want 5 sections and I want headings in that, which is a bit like your Python syntax. You've got to get your language right. So it needs to be, in inverted commas, business language. It needs to be sentences and they need to make sense. So that's another sort of check. But you get to a point where, well, whether that document has 5 sections or 6 sections or 1 section, or paragraphs 20 lines long or 5 lines long, all of that's a bit woolly and might not matter that much. But I think what that does is emphasize where this stuff is going to be good. The more a document sits in a predefined, well-known process, a better an agent is going to be at it, because people are going to say, produce me this document and I know what that needs to look like. It's going to look like this, these 5 paragraphs, these wordings, and it wouldn't do this. When it produces something different from that, person's going to go, no, that's wrong, and hopefully tell the agent what was wrong so it can learn and do it better next time. Whereas if And I think summaries are quite a good one of this, although not perfect. But if you're saying, "Oh, give me a summary of something," it gives you 5 key points out of 8, but there were 12 points in there. Well, it's somewhat right. You're really into this vague territory of where you wanted a summary. That doesn't mean give me, summarize a 2-page document. It doesn't mean rewrite and give me 2 pages. So there's always going to be some information loss. Perhaps it chose the wrong bits to lose, and you disagree with that. That you can go on forever. You 2 different people, 2 different summaries, and you can argue till you're blue in the face. So I think what you're emphasizing here is that spectrum. The more you're into a well-defined process, the better it's going to be. The more you're into, well, I don't really know, it doesn't matter that much. There's obviously looseness there to judge it, but also so much, such a wide spectrum of the end result. Could be from anything 10% good to 100% good, because it's very, very, there's a wide range there.
Yeah, and so in my Word documents to the board of directors example, one of my key directors just has an opinion, right? And that opinion may or may not have been predictable, but ultimately that's not easily testable without running the test, right? And it's sort of because that whole process is always going to be very human, because we know that if you have a group of people that you need to convince of something, that is to some degree contentious or open to interpretation or requires collective decision making, things like that, then the job is, and this is why things like PowerPoint presentations exist, right? The job is to be persuasive in a certain way and to then try and convince a group of people that a certain course of action is the correct one or something. And that may well happen in a meeting, but it almost certainly happens in a wider human context where other meetings have been had about it before. This might be your 2nd or 3rd iteration at trying to do the same thing. You don't get a decision in the meeting, but you go around and lobby each of the team members over the water cooler separately and all of this stuff, right? And all of that whole process is, it may look on the outside, decision not made on Tuesday, decision made on Thursday, when to the outside looks like a switch was flipped, when the reality was hundreds of little dials were tweaked to the point where the general consensus had switched from one side to another to such a degree that some action could be taken, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that is in itself a process of sorts, but it is an outpouring of complexity. It is an illustration of how humans work and how they do things. And I think it to a degree, it's sort of easy to see the macro process and go, well, why wouldn't a language model be able to do this? But the language model can't turn up at a water cooler at the opportune moment because you were hiding around the corner waiting for that particular director to get thirsty, right? You know what I mean? So and so I think both arguments are correct, right? And I agree with your thesis that in highly structured, well documented, process-driven environments, language models will perform better.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, and I think you've created you've painted a great picture there of a high impact, complex, typical process, which probably isn't that well recorded in companies, but reflects actually what goes on. But then if you break, if we took that example as and gave it a real name, if you think of something like monthly or quarterly reporting, that involves many of the bits which you're talking about there, which is the leaders of departments will go into a monthly or quarterly meeting, and they're expected to have all the information for their department. Could be several hundred or several thousand people. The key winners and losers of their department in terms of key KPIs and key products, and that person sits in there and they sort of spend an hour. They might have a couple of sentences to say, might be a bit more, and they may have to persuade or at least show that they're taking action for problems and opportunities. That quarterly meeting, then rolls down to teams of people pulling various things together, least of all, that final PowerPoint presentation or the 3 slides, which you've got to consolidate all of your 3 months of your 500-person team into, three PowerPoint slides. That itself was informed from many people understanding what's been done and progress has been made, which in itself is a process that sits over all the people actually doing stuff. So like you say, you sort of, this overall process has many, many steps. And if we look at that, where's an agent going to do well? Well, in this example of, quarterly reporting, or quite quickly, in that industrial revolution in the factory type model, quite quickly, my experience is those quarterly reports quickly become quite templated, so that it's quick for everyone turns up. They know what they're expecting to see, 3 slides per department, pluses, minuses, actions, however you break it down. But they quickly sort of form into a sort of a template. And so again, you're into, okay, well, that's something which, has defined output, and that will go all the way through, down the various layers of the process. There'll be monthly reviews, there'll be, weekly reviews, there'll be reporting against KPIs. Here's what I was aiming to do. Here's what I did. I'll give it a percentage, good, bad, indifferent, So, layers and layers of these processes get injected in. And it's those smaller nuggets, I think, where you can say, oh, well, if I had an agent do that, and what it's got to do is take these 5 emails, all emails from this 5-person team, for example, and then give me a 10-point summary of the progress for the week. It's probably going to be pretty decent at that. It's not going to be perfect. Is it going to be as good as a human? I mean, but to the point where I would argue now, yeah, probably no different. It's going to make some mistakes. There'd be some interpretability in there. But if you present that sort of summary to the team and say, okay, what do you think, everyone? They're probably going to have a quick read through. Oh, you missed this. Oh, what about that? I think this is quite important. Add a few points, and you've got quite a nice summary of the week there. And you've saved a bunch of hours. But as you say, that's just a small, one small, tiny little process in this perhaps, 20, 30, 50 process, which actually runs over many months. And so if this was a weekly thing, it's going to be repeated 12 times before, that's feeding into a summary, for the quarterly report. And I think this is where the sort of rubber hits the road. So you're going to get an agent in. It's pretty good at doing that. And you go, great. And it really, the question here is, okay, so what's the impact there? And it feels like people are saying, all right, so, well, there'll be a load of people out of their jobs. And you look at that and you go, well, it's not really people's jobs to create summaries and report up. It's part of their role. But no one's there just saying, oh, what do you do? Oh, I summarize what the team did for the week. Usually that's a side of desk job, or it's the sort of manager's job, or the team leader's job, or, and again, it's not their only thing they're doing. So you've got something which helps and definitely has an impact, but arguably, it's not, you're not replacing the whole role. I mean, do you think that's fair that, these agents are going to come and start automating fairly well parts of the process?
Well, I think the example you gave is a little bit ideal world, right? And you embed it in a process that you and me and most people who get involved in such things knows is bullshit, right? So why are we doing any of this? Well, we want our business to be better. We sell things. We want to sell more things, right? There's different departments that sell different things. The job of these sort of PowerPoints and these meetings and these quarterly annual reviews, whatever, is communication, right? To be able to, make decisions and tweak our trajectory as we go along. And so every business I've worked in, everyone knows, although no one states, that, for example, the annual objective setting process is nonsense, right? Mm-hmm. The target setting is as good as finger in the wind, magical thinking as it ever gets, right? It's just not, all the cottage industry goes to creating what a plausible target number is. That you do all your maths and you say that, okay, so I think we can sell, 3.2% more shoes in 2026 than we did in 2025. You take that to your CEO, who goes, yeah, right, whatever, I want 5%, right? At which point all your work was wasted. Right, because the 5% is now the number. So you've got set a target that may or may not be achievable, right? It's just not in line with the process that was created to try and arrive at the right number. You've just got an arbitrary number, right? And so now you've got to hit that, and that's going, that's necessarily going to be backloaded. Right, because you predicted 3.2%, that means that's what you expect to be able to deliver. Now you've got to figure out how to deliver 5%, and that's going to take you a little while to do, because maybe you have to ramp up production and so on. So the magic, the real effort isn't going to kick in. Your uptick in production isn't going to kick in until towards the end of that business cycle, right? But the CEO always wants to know now. And therefore, when you get the agent to produce a spreadsheet or a PowerPoint from the numbers, it's going to do it diligently as per the process, and it's going to produce something that says, no, 3.2%, right? Because that's what we can produce right now. That's the uptick we're capable of. So here's your report to the CEO, right, at the end of the first quarter. And you're like, no, I can't say that to the CEO. Right, I'm not saying that shit to him, right? So we're going to have to find a way to massage this set of numbers to either eradicate or downplay the 3.2% and show us that we are, either hitting or on track the 5%, which might well be by stating only a particular product line or something that you have managed to ramp up or already was higher. Right, something like that. We know this happens, right? Because we're half the time the ones asked to do it, right? Find me another way of saying this that looks more like what we said we would do, right? And then obviously stuff changes along the way, and suddenly everyone stops buying shoes or something, and someone blocks the Strait of Hormuz, so now shoe soles are more expensive to make because they're plastic or some shit like that. And so now, my ability to hit those targets is even harder than it was before. So we have a process that looks on the surface like it's really well structured. It's pretty unassailable and explicit. Whereas the reality is that every person in that update meeting has massaged the numbers. And some of them have massaged it for fairly understandable reasons, like I just described. Others of them are just playing funny games, right? That suit their particular agenda at a given point in time. So where I agree with you that some portion of that process will still be superseded by an agent, how much of that just has to then just be revised again by a human? How much time was really saved? And are agents ever going to be good enough to foresee the political problems of reporting low growth in a scenario like that, right? Which maybe you're already on thin ice with the CEO who's looking for a reason to sack you. You know what I mean? Mm. So, and and that's why I'm slightly dubious about all of this, because I think on paper it looks good, but humans aren't on paper. Humans are out there in the real world. And this is, knowledge work is fundamentally human orientated. As much as we think about as being spreadsheets and PowerPoints and Word documents and emails, what are those emails, Word documents, PowerPoints doing? They exist to communicate with other humans, real fleshy entities in the actual world. So that's where my difficulty with this whole concept arises from. And that's different from the development scenario, right? Which is not about communication. It's closer to the coalface.
I think what's interesting about that is, for me, that highlights the fact that you have a process. That process, might be bullshit. So, it's bullshit job sort of thing, which, apparently there's this survey that was done even a few years ago now, and it's like 45% of jobs, people say, their role is, just doing exactly say, I'm doing something not because it's the right thing to do, but someone's told me to do it because it's some arse covering or something. And again, if you look at, the history of companies, when they make change like that, generally it's so hard to get so many people to give up their little personal goals and vendettas and stuff, that you call it business process re-engineering or something, and you say, oh well, we're just doing away with that process and we're replacing it with this one, and it's completely different. Everyone has to re-interview for their jobs because it's an acknowledgement that the process has got so dodgy. We've now redesigned it, which usually isn't that much better, but it's an attempt to get closer to what really needs to happen and do away with all the human messy bits in between, or reduce them so that there's less of that influence and get closer to an actual sort of efficient mechanical type. A passes to B, passes to C. There's no friction and it all comes out perfectly. So I think that is really some of the things that people are looking at here when companies, certainly at the moment, are claiming, oh yeah, we've laid off people because of AI. I think what they're really saying is, yeah, we've been running our process for 20 years. It's got pretty rusty and heavy. And we've looked at it, we've realized there are a whole bunch of things that don't need to be doing. So those jobs now no longer exist or can be done as part of another job. And we've got some tools which make people efficient. We'll call that AI. But really, it's the same process that's been going on for years and years, which is, you have an opportunity, humans usually create people to manage that opportunity and make it happen. You start making loads of money on it. It flattens off. You've now got a big team. You work to become more efficient. You now don't need as many people to keep that service going. And so you've got to do something with all that at those extra hours, and you've got to try and slim it down and move people on to something else. And I think that goes on regardless of what you call the technology. And so I think there is an element of two things there is, one, don't do a bullshit job quicker, or if you do it quicker, maybe it surfaces that it's bullshit much quicker. And two, if you're changing what fundamentally needs to be done, that's not necessarily an AI thing. It's just you realise that process needs a change.
Yeah, I mean, there's a simple efficiency here, right? And so that would apply to a machine in a factory, and also you've bought a new machine. You're still using the old machine for the moment because it increases capacity, but ultimately you're gonna turn off the old machine eventually, probably quite soon, and I think that, but this isn't the machine, right? This isn't something monolithic that's going to be swapped out. I think there are thousands of touch points in which AI is able to remove or decrease friction. So people are talking about it very much in terms of switching off jobs, and there will absolutely be jobs that will be directly and completely replaced by AI. I just don't think, I think those are the exception rather than the rule. And actually, the overall efficiency in the system can be improved on lots of little places here and there, none of which add up to a job, but might create enough efficiency in the system where roles can be sunset. I have a team of 10 people to do this now, but because everyone's more efficient and that team is not, directly tied to revenue generation, it's a cost overhead. I can now do it with 7 rather than 10, right? And so, have you replaced a whole person with an AI? No, you absolutely haven't. Everyone's still doing the same job; they're just doing it better, right? But I think that type of change takes a long time to happen. And people aren't using AI well. I think the tools that are given to people, and we should probably come on to some of those, are not particularly good. And therefore, actually, there could be a negative overhead to embedding in AI. But I think over time, there will be a shift in the workforce. But it won't be. I can delete these 10 jobs now simply because their skills are redundant, right? I just don't see it for most cases.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard two examples which I think underline both sides of this, and this is why I think it's interesting. I think that the two sides can be true at the same time, and one was an example in local government where a guy has introduced AI, which does lots of things like summarizing meetings and creating action plans and filling out forms, all of which, as we talked about, there'll be standard forms, done certain ways, summarizing meeting minutes. And he was saying that effectively it was taking about 8 hours a week from his sort of case workers. And that meant, and he was saying, but, local government, the list of cases to be worked on is always, there's always another 200 to be done. So the fact you've taken 8 hours out means you can do more cases. So there was no talk of, we're getting rid of people. It's just we can now do more work and we've got loads more work to do. And I think that's, as you say, the positive side. Then another one I heard was around, I think it was hedge funds, and that you go and work there, you come in with your economics degree or whatever. For the first 2 years, you're producing PowerPoints for account managers. And of course, what they're always trying to do is look for new opportunities. So you're doing sort of investigation research, putting this PowerPoint together, giving it to your bosses, then going pitching it, and they go, oh, no, we're not going to invest in that. And so it falls by the wayside. And I heard that what these people are realizing that, an AI can produce these PowerPoints as good as the new guy that's just arrived. And so therefore we don't need the new guy, And so you look at that and you go, yeah, probably fair enough. My big question there is, why are you employing somebody who's got loads of intelligence and then just giving them PowerPoints to build? So there's something about sort of, a bullshit onboarding process there. I mean, it's not quite bullshit, but it is that thing of what I think AI might reveal is, because you can do things like that really easily, then you can't get away with saying to someone new to the team, oh, just go and do something trivial, because trivial things are going to be done by a machine. So actually you've got to think out your onboarding process, because you have to ask, well, why would you just give them something simple, go and make the tea? Well, why are you doing that? Oh, because I'm too busy to actually, onboard them. So, well, you've got to start onboarding properly. It's not the old days anymore. You get these people on board, they're going to be a benefit to your company. It's the only reason you're employing them. It's good for you if you get them up to speed quickly. So you should be designing that process and getting them to do worthwhile stuff, albeit low risk, rather than just, get them to go and, the easy low risk job is just go and do this.
Well, we spotted this problem because we both happen to be working for a very large consultancy when the whole GPT 3.5 explosion happened. And, you sort of look around you and go, well, there's a lot of junior jobs within this consultancy that feel like they could be at some point fairly soon replaced by Gen AI. And you go, yeah, cool. You either buy that or you don't. But let's say you do. it poses a secondary problem, which is pretty unassailable, which is a consultancy is only people. Right, and the whole contract with a consultancy from an employee's perspective, progression, right? They're heavily structured, highly structured environments where everyone has their hierarchy, and the carrot is promotion, more money, more responsibility, and more training, right? And if you say, well, who does the so-called bullshit jobs? Well, it's our graduates and our junior consultants, and you say, well, yeah, okay, let's get rid of that layer then. Well, who then is who are your future partners? Who are your future directors? You know what I mean? How are you going to have a pipeline that's going to keep feeding your experienced people and your knowledgeable people? And that pipeline is all about filtering out as well. So as people progress or don't progress or get sunset out of the business, you know, again, ideally, you're left with the better people and a more efficient, more skillful enterprise. But if you're not feeding the machine can't make sausages, right? You know what I mean? So I just don't see how a consultancy can behave like that. So to your point, what are you now having your graduates do, right? Because, you know, it's arguable that what they're doing is managing agents, right?
Yes.
Just like a lot of what developers do. But you don't get to not employ them. And I even struggle to see how you can reduce the amount of people that you're employing at this point, or how you can reduce it dramatically, because the basic assumption is if I'm taking in less at the bottom, that I expect the top to be smaller at some point, right? And are you really saying that as a business, as a consultancy right now, right? I'm not sure anyone is.
Well, it's really interesting. It's almost like a demographics kind of diagram where, you know, in the past countries have, you know, grown. So the older people make up a small, small percentage of the population, and then your population boosts at the sort of, you know, 20 to 30 year old. So that's the kind of fat, if you imagine a horizontal bar chart with ages going from center outwards, you know, and then you sort of got your birth rate, and then what's happened with countries where the birth rate's massively dropped, where people, you know, the fat middle, which was, you know, 20 to 40 year olds, that was your highest percentage. You know, it's now 30 years on. Now they're now in the, you know, 60 to 80 bracket. Oh, and you didn't have any children. So now you suddenly got this very fat top of the, you know, like 30% of your people are, and I think it's even worse than that, like 50% of people are, you know, 50 and upwards. And then, you know, the people actually generating wealth for your company or for your country are, you know, in the bottom half. And that's exactly the same thing. You're going to have, you know, like 17 board members and, you know, and 5 people in your company. It's just like, you know, it's somewhat...
well, there are parts of modern industry that basically are exactly that, right? And you've got the employeeless company nonsense and all of this. You know, it's clearly sociologically unrealistic, right? And so the end game, I don't know what the end game Dario Amodei is envisioning really looks like, because every time I think through it, it sounds pretty apocalyptic to me. It's not, if not just dystopian, right? So these guys are not thinking straight. The whole billionaire brain problem. So if you think about it from like a normal average participation in society, it's simply not. You know, it's not going to end up how they are envisaging, right? There's the social contract is broken when you remove the ability for people to get on the ladder. So, you know, something's got to give. But again, we can get into politics.
And again, if you were employing people now, you'd be saying, right, well, we've got to onboard them, we've got to get them to do better things. I mean, one of one of the low risk things is you would be, well, personally, I'd be getting them to, you know, design and run agents to automate processes, you know, most likely with human in the loop. But I could envisage that where you might have taken on 10 grads, you might only need 5 now, or maybe even 3. And, you know, they're doing the work of 10, but that will create, you know, and then if you give it time, then you will, you know, then your company will slim down because your people retire. But that's a 20 to 30-year endeavor. And you might be forced to move quicker because you might find that there's a new startup in town which doesn't have 5,000 people, that actually has 500, but are able to do the same business you are. And that's where you really come into trouble, because you can probably manage through the slow, you know, natural attrition to your business, but it becomes really hard when you have someone who's 10 times smaller doing, you know, threatening to take or eat your lunch. And that's where it becomes really difficult. And that's where the horrible cuts come, because it makes me think of, you know, one of the poster child of using AI for their business is Klarna. But when you listen to I think it's the CEO talking about it, you know, and how they're reducing people, it's this attrition model. So what he's saying is, like, 3 years ago, they employed about something like 7,500 people. And then they're now doing more business, and they now only employ 4,500. But he's not saying that they've got rid of loads of people. It's just through natural attrition, through the jobs are quite short term, I think. I'm sure they have made some cuts as well. But what he's saying is, you know, over a period of 3 to 5 years, we'll be doing the same or more business with less people, but not necessarily by, you know, getting out his chainsaw like Elon Musk. And I can see that coming. Still paints a fairly dodgy 5 years time, where if everyone's, you know, naturally cut down, then where are people growing? Unless you've got new companies springing up. And if new companies are employing a lot less, then you've got to have a lot more new companies. So it's still, overall, you still end up with, well, are we going to have a, you know, surplus of people, or are we
especially
going to,
when,
what should be
you know,
happening is we should be growing our economy. But
well, I mean, that aside, like, you talk about people retiring, but like most of early Gen X, late Gen Xers and millennials, they're not going to have enough money to retire. Plus, there's this general consensus of the retirement age having to be increased pretty much everywhere, at which point that leaves more people on the workforce. And what are they going to do? Right.
Yeah.
And so if the young people aren't getting employed, the old people aren't leaving jobs, or they can't get jobs, but they are somehow retired. There's no welfare state, because apparently that's not a thing anymore, right? And then all these companies like, oh yeah, we produce all of our consumer based stuff with 7 people, but who's going to buy it? Because no one's going to have a job to be able to afford it, and there's no welfare state. The numbers, the equation, it's not just that it doesn't add up. The equation is nonsense, right? And it doesn't take a lot, and it doesn't take much knowledge about politics and economics and sociology to figure out that that's not going to work, right? So what is the solution? I'm not seeing it. And I'm not saying there isn't one, and I'm not saying we haven't got a utopia coming down the line at all of us, but the guys that are pushing agentic solutions to reduce the size of the workforce are not thinking about what the rest of us are going to do in 20 years' time, right? And what society is going to look at. They're only looking at the balance sheet at the moment and realizing they can't service the debt that they have. Right. Yeah. And therefore they're going to have to come for all our jobs, because that's the only way they'll stay in business. But it's not going to work. It can't possibly work. That's just not how maths works.
Yeah. And also, I think, you know, as we're saying here is, yes, there's some efficiency gains here, but this has been going on for, you know, for as long as we've all been alive. Is you start doing something, and at some point there's an invention, and you do it better. We've done it with farming, we've done it with industry and factories. We're now doing it and have been doing it anyway with office work and knowledge work. That doesn't, it just doesn't feel any different to me. Perhaps the efficiency gains at some point might be massive, but again, this is the promise for the last 3 years. Oh yeah, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. The year of the agent, was it supposed to have been last year? And arguably, yes, agents have arrived and they're doing some stuff, but again, they're not doing people's jobs. They might be helping, they might have done away with a few bits. I think probably more the big effect is that seniors in companies and leaders in companies who are under pressure are laying people off because they think that job should be done by AI. Whether it can be is, I think there's still a large gap at the moment. I mean, perhaps I'm being naive there, but the eternal promise that it's going to be this year that your job will go, and it doesn't go, and then it's now it's this year, and then it still doesn't go. And yes, there's been some changes to it, but at the end of the day, his job hasn't changed a lot in the last sort of 20, 30 years anyway.
Well, I mean, it's going to get more problematic than this because all indications are that the main AI providers are going to have to put their price up, right? So whether or not, and that businesses are actively now hiring humans to do stuff that it's becoming too expensive to have agents do, right? I've literally seen reports of people hiring junior programmers to do belt and braces, bottom up, boring, boilerplate code, because agents are too expensive to do that, and it's cheaper to get a junior developer in to do it, right? Which is mad. But this is the problem. If the prices of inference goes up much more, then Gen AI stops being cost effective, right? So it doesn't really matter whether it can do my job or not. I'm cheaper, right? And if I'm cheaper, I'm going to get the job done. Not that I'm going to get employed. And that's the problem, because it really is a case of Anthropic and OpenAI are going to have to put their prices up, or they go out of business because of the amount of debt that they've taken on and the amount of bets they've made on like things like data centers that don't look like they're going to come to fruition. So, we're we're all in jobs because agents are too expensive. And it reminds me a little bit of what happened with offshoring, which is not at all the same thing. And I do not wish to denigrate our beautiful and wonderful offshore colleagues. But what happened with offshoring in places like India was that we were shipping off fairly skilled labor to good people in India who were cheaper, right? Until they weren't, because they're not anymore, right? At which point you've made a good sin. They're a really good sort of tech delivery machine in India. There's tons of brilliant people. You can have an offshore team in India, but it isn't really the case anymore. You're doing that because it's cheaper. You know what I mean? You're doing that because it makes some practical sense. I can't get the skills onshore or whatever. But it isn't the case now where companies are forcing people to hire offshore because it's just as cheap to hire them onshore. So, it's whatever other calculus comes into play at that point.
Yeah, so it's interesting whether the sell it cheap now is going to pay off for the companies, or whether in 3 years' time we're all saying, oh, do you remember that AI stuff that could do this? Yeah, that was good while it lasted.
Yeah, exactly, while it was subsidised. So, right. We're over an hour. I wanted to talk about as well the actual tools, but as ever, we found quite a rich vein of stuff to talk about there. So I'd like to come back to the tools, and by that I mean I'd like to talk about agent skills for this type of stuff, right? And the difference between things like co-work and agent skills, and how effective AIs or AI agents are at the actual coalface work that we're talking about here, which, let's be clear, is usually something along the lines of making a Microsoft type document, right? So I think, and I'd like to actually do, it's probably not a bad idea because I'd like to go and do a bit more playing around with this stuff. So I think we come back next time and talk about the actual tools.
Let's talk tools. Sounds good.
Yes, let's do that. Okay, good. Let's knock this on the head because I need to go to the sunshine, Pete. I need to go and sit in the sun.
Yes, the orb in the sky. Nice. Well, enjoy it, and we'll speak next time.
Okay, nice one. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The confusion matrix.